Welcome to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. I'm Kevin Parkerson here with my co-host Kevin Higgins. Before we dive into today's incredible episode featuring Jim Newsome, we want to take a moment to address the breaking news on the ILA USMX tentative agreement announced earlier this week. It's worth noting that today's episode was recorded before this agreement was reached, so you won't hear Jim Newsome addressing this specific news. But what's fascinating and interesting is how much of what he discusses, labor dynamics, automation challenges, and port competitiveness, directly connects to the context of this agreement. So welcome back, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
Thanks, Kevin. And Kevin, it's good to be with you. It's bloody cold up here in South Carolina.
Oh, it's cold. It's cold here too. We're
cold,
getting ready to get
cold
some
here
snow.
in Arkansas too.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Jim, just recent announcement. We were just talking with you just a couple of days, and we knew that there was a possibility for an early agreement or an agreement to be made. And I'd love to get your take on that before we get into the full episode.
Well, I mean, it's good news that this is settled. I mean,
Yeah,
the uncertainty. I mean, we've seen the impact of this uncertainty over the last 6 months with a lot of diversion of cargo to what I now consider unnatural gateways. So we need to get this behind us. Uncertainty in the global supply chain is not helping anyone. So I'm certainly glad it's done. It didn't go to another work stoppage. That would have been bad for our industry, and certainly for the people who source globally. It would have been bad.
Yes.
So yeah. I'm happy about it. I'm kind of pleasantly surprised, to be honest with you. I figured it was going to go down to the wire.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah, I think we all did, and we were just talking with you a couple of days ago, and I think the three of us kind of agreed that, look, this is probably going to, result in a strike. We knew that there were preliminary discussions. It sounds like they were even having secret meetings to their secret meetings, which is always good. And it sounds like that was beneficial.
Yeah, it seems so. And that's good. I'm not sure. I mean, again, the dialogue behind this and some of the noise in the market is a bit misleading. I'm honestly not sure what will have changed. We'll have to see that. We haven't seen the wording yet. As we talked before, there was significant wording, Article 11 in the master contract starting in 2012, delved into technology and automation to a very significant extent. And it put some guardrails around it, which, from my opinion, really meant that automation was by no means a certainty in a terminal. And if you go back to, from 2000 on, the terminals that have been built, and you start with the Norfolk Terminal, Virginia International Gateway, that was semi-automated. You couldn't fully automate. But then the Traypac Terminal in Jacksonville, the terminal that we planned at Leatherman, I mean, I think it's safe to say that we looked at automation. And in the reality of life, to some extent, I mean, when it's 40% more CapEx, you can only partially automate and can't really save on workforce, then it was of questionable value to us in terms of the flexibility that we use. And the interesting part was we could never really prove that it brought more space utilization. I mean, I would think it did. It surprised me that the experts told us that wasn't really the case. So I'm not sure this wasn't more of a message of intent about, stopping wholesale automation than something that's going to be really substantively different. Yeah. And I think what we need to do, I mean, we need to focus on this scarce resource, which is U.S. port container terminal capacity, and how do we make it better? How do we make it more efficient? How do we make sure that we've got capacity for the future, recognizing that these new terminals are difficult. New terminals are very difficult to build. Yeah. And existing terminals, it's very difficult to retrofit. So I hope that in the next 6 years, once this issue settled in a 6-year master contract, that the terminal operators in the union will spend much more productive time on that than they appear to have done in the past.
Yeah, let's get down to getting efficient, and because we need to continue to grow.
Well, man, I
And
really hope. Yeah, I hope that's what we do. I hope that there's a little bit more of a proactive approach to this versus a reactive. Meaning, we've been doing this for a couple of cycles already in my career, every 4 to 6 years, and it's a lot has happened. A lot businesses have had to spend a lot of money and do a lot of things that they shouldn't have to do. And I'm hopeful that in the next 6 years, and I think I maybe even said this on the last go around, that I'm hopeful that it doesn't come down to the wire and doesn't turn into an extension and doesn't turn into the last few days, and then we get all excited that there's finally an agreement. I'm hope we can get excited well before, and that this cycle can somehow end, but also help these ports and terminals with some new technology, and to get us in the 21st century and compete globally. Those are the things that
Absolutely.
they need to occur.
Yeah, absolutely.
well, I think when all is said and done, in the top 10 container ports in the U.S. do 85% of the volume. It's about 45 million TEUs. And as the industries all concentrate, I don't think that number is going to get less. I think it's going to get more concentrated, particularly as the lines try to optimize their schedules and things of that nature. And if you look at it, there are really 4 locations that can add capacity. And that's Houston, Savannah, Charleston, and Norfolk. Those have tangible places where they can add capacity in the next 30 to 50 years. And these are long-term projects. And the good news is that happens to be where the population is growing. So as freight wants to reestablish reliability by getting closer to where it's needed, that's where the capacity is. It's not going to be any new terminal capacity in New York. It's not going to be any in LA and Long Beach. They really don't even want to be in the terminal business in LA and Long Beach. They won't like saying that, but we can all recognize that. And contrary to the narrative that all this issue has been about foreign carriers sort of wanting to disadvantage American workers, those 4 ports I just mentioned are all publicly owned and operated ports. They are run by the public sector. In Houston's case, the city, and Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk states. So they're not foreign entities, and they are spending public resources to create supply chain capacity. So we need to be about helping them do that in an intelligent way, and understanding that these are terminal operators that invest money, in states that invest money in some cases, in other ports, private enterprise, private equity that invest money to serve the foreign ocean carriers. And I'll tell you from experience, I mean, anyone will tell you that the foreign ocean carriers don't always pay the wage increases they supposedly agree to. So, I mean, it's really that sort of narrative needs to be debunked. I mean, these are U.S. terminal operators, public and private sector, that are trying to make sure that the supply chain is reliable for the future, and that's a long-term proposition. You don't build terminals quickly. You don't, and it's very difficult to change the concept of existing terminal. I mean, global container terminal did half theirs in Bayonne, but it's hard to make half a terminal automated.
Yeah,
Really, it's very disruptive, as you can imagine.
So, Jim, when do you expect that we will start understanding a bit more about what actually was agreed to? And, it is tentative, so it's got to be ratified, voted on. What's that process look like? How long does that take?
Well, I mean, they're going to have it's a very professional process. The ILA will have a wage scale meeting to talk about the entire package. Now that it's visible, they're not going to reject it. I mean, they got a 62% increase over 6 years, which is unprecedented.
But I want 65.
I'm not saying it's and I'm not saying something more. Look, all this stuff, I think we need to be clear with your listeners. All this stuff is agreed through collective bargaining. I mean, the parties sit and agreed to 63%.
Good point.
In this case, they were heavily influenced by the Biden administration to do so, but that's the reality of life. and it's a high wage industry. And the history of that goes back to the fact that it was a casual labor industry that had to work when ships were in. But a lot of that is not the case. Terminal work is not casual labor industry. But set that aside, I think there's very little chance it won't be agreed to. I think the management will agree to it, and they'll move forward. The consequence of this falling apart is dire, and it's just not gonna happen. People, a lot of challenges in this industry always, what's fueling ships, things of that nature. What's the tariff situation? We haven't even talked about that yet, but no one knows what that is. So I think it's in everyone's interest to get this behind. So I anticipate it plays itself out literally by the end of January, first week in February. Okay. I think it'll get settled, and I don't think there's anything earth-shattering language-wise that's going to come out of this relative to what was there before. I never believed it could be. It was always about starting at a local level to put a concept out of doing some automation and what's the impact on jobs. And I don't see how that will change. I mean, it's got to, there's no one size fits all. As you know, every port works differently. I mean, even the ones that you think should work the same, they work differently.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I know, Kevin, I know you and I, we've talked a lot about this. We had a lot of guests talk about this. It has been in the industry, sort of a marker, and we've gotten past that. It is thankfully resolved itself. It's a win-win solution. It's good that we can now, in some ways, move on to the next item, which is tariffs, and continue with the Red Sea, and more consolidation, more new partnerships amongst carriers, and all of those type things that are in our industry right now. But Jim, we really appreciate you coming back and updating us just a little bit. Notice. We'd love to have you back once we understand a little bit more about what is in the agreement, and maybe help the audience decipher and understand, what really got agreed to. And then I'd love to start talking a little bit more about preparation for 6 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the final message, I don't think there's no guarantee that a new terminal is going to be automated now more than it was before.
Right.
Everybody's going to have to make their own calculation on that. And, in a way, it's almost like what driver do you prefer in golf. That's a bad analogy potentially. But, for some companies, automation is critical. For others, very skeptical of it because it's only partial automation, and no one's thinking about removing jobs. Everybody goes into this knowing that there are no job losses going to happen from existing jobs. So anyway, I appreciate you having me. I appreciate our friendship, and look forward to catching up again soon.
No, we appreciate you, Jim. Thanks for jumping on short notice.
Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
See you.
Bye-bye. Welcome to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. I'm Kevin Parkerson.
And I'm Kevin Higgins. Together we bring you over 60 years in combined experience in global logistics.
In each episode, we'll dive into the latest industry trends, share practical tips, celebrate wins, and share stories from the logistics front lines, all while helping businesses optimize their logistics operations.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Kev Talks. We have another special guest with us today. I'd like to welcome back Jim Newsome, former CEO of the South Carolina Port Authority, and we are excited to get his insights into what's going on with the ILA discussion. So Jim, welcome back.
Well, Kevin, it's great to be with you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Good 2025.
Looking forward to the discussions with you, Jim. I have to start off, though, a little bit. Last time we didn't talk a little bit about Tennessee or SEC or any of that. I'll try not to make too many digs. We're recording this, and SEC's not doing too well in the playoffs right now. The newbie, the Longhorns are still in, which that's a whole nother podcast probably. But
Yeah.
we'll have to make a little wager this time next year. Around some of these games. I don't think Tennessee and Arkansas are playing each other next year. But sorry that the season didn't end
So
any better, although it was a good season.
They are playing next year. They're
Oh,
playing.
they are? Okay, good.
So, and I think that we all ran into a buzzsaw with Ohio State. I think time will show that. But we had a good year. We play in basketball on Saturday, so in Knoxville. So maybe there's time for earlier wager.
Oh
Go
my gosh,
Hawks.
the Hogs and the Vols in Knoxville.
Woo pig. Well, listen, Jim, I know the last time we spoke, a lot has changed. We wanted to have you back as our resident ILA expert in a way, but a lot has changed and a lot hasn't. So the last time we spoke, there's now an extension through January 15th.
Yeah.
We now know who the new administration is, President-elect Trump, which I think has a little bit of a different flavor now on this topic. So maybe just kind of give the audience a little bit of where the current state is from your perspective. I know you've been, involved in a way, and maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I'm certainly an interested observer. Having been involved in this really for all of my career, and even before when I grew up with my dad in the Port of Savannah. Obviously, they made a wage settlement, which gave the ILA what they wanted, and they left this automation issue pending. And I don't want to trivialize it because obviously anything that would lead to a work stoppage for even 5 or 6 days is impactful. But to me, it's sort of much ado about nothing. I mean, there is really, and I'll tell you why I say that, because the current ILA contract has significant wording on automation. It's Article 9 of the contract. If any of your listeners want to look at it, it's available online. And it sets out several sort of ideas and principles that would be followed if someone wanted to automate a terminal. And the first of which is that the USMX has agreed, and I say USMX, this has been portrayed, unfortunately, as foreign carriers against the ILA, and it's really not.
Yep, that's right.
I mean, these terminal operators are largely U.S. companies. Even if they're a subsidiary of a foreign-owned shipping line, they are a U.S. company,
right,
paying U.S. entities. So that's a bit of a unfortunate portrayal that's designed to bring a lot of leverage against the carriers, which I think is a shame. But the USMX already has agreed to semi-automation being the only solution, as you know, on the West Coast, in a place like LBCT, or in Europe at the Maasvlakte terminal in Rotterdam or the Altenwerder terminal in Hamburg. They're fully automated, with the exception of the crane. So semi-automation in and of itself blunts a lot of the efficiencies to be gained through automation. It's just part of the calculus of it. So I think that's one thing to be stated. The second thing is there's a consultation process. The parties commit to consult in advance of implementing automation. There's a technology committee, management, and ILA, and they should consider the issue. If they don't agree, there's an arbitrator, which really would render a final opinion on the subject. So it's not just something you wake up one morning and decide you're going to do.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, it's pretty obvious, and I think it's obvious in the 4 or 5 terminals in the U.S. that have actually automated, there are no job losses from this automation. I mean, we haven't had, can't cite it in depth, but I will tell you anecdotally, I don't think an ILA job has ever been lost over terminal automation. Those jobs are protected. Now, that doesn't mean they're protected in perpetuity.
Right.
I mean, that's a different topic. So there is ample wording to allow consideration of automation. And I think through your observation, you will agree with me. And having looked at it in my terminal career, it's certainly not necessarily the case that you're going to automate a terminal. We looked at automating terminals. It's expensive. It's 40% more CapEx, and the benefits are questionable in many respects. So I would say that most of the new terminals that have been built have not been automated. So in that sense, I really am not sure what's going to be achieved here, what they're trying to achieve. I think it would be crazy, just as a matter of U.S. industrial policy. I don't know what industry would agree to a perpetual ban on automation. Perpetual agreements usually end up
Exactly.
poorly. So I don't really see that happening. So I'm a bit puzzled by the objective here.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, Jim. What is the objective based on what you've said? And I tend to lean toward everything that you just said. So is everyone is branding this as an automation, as you mentioned, wages are done. Everyone's branding this as an automation discussion, and if in fact there's already that language that allows for essentially a portion of a terminal automated, what is this really about?
It is about the ILA wanting to get their way. I think, basically pushing the leverage. I mean, they've got significant leverage. That leverage was increased under the Biden administration. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We all know how the agreement in October was done. It was really done with a heavy hand from the Biden administration to get it done. And I mean, look, we all know in negotiation, you ask for something that you want, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. And I don't see them getting this here. And I don't know why I don't know why they worry about it, because like I said, if this wording continued as it is today, it certainly doesn't mean that new terminals built will be automated, because it is a big decision. Terminals are expensive to begin with. My estimation is it's 40% more CapEx. You may or may not get more productivity. You may or may not get more space utilization. It depends on the footprint you're looking at. But I don't think it's wise to simply say we'll never do it, because never is not always a never are two things you should never say. Wages have gone up. Certainly the higher wages are, the more attractive it is. There's a lot of variables to it. But as you know as well as I know, productivity on terminals is way more than about manual versus automated terminals. It's about work rules. It's about manning. It's about start times, things of that nature. It's a very complex issue. And the bottom line is automation is not the panacea it's being portrayed as being. Everybody who's built a new terminal since 2000 has looked at it in one form or fashion. And there are, I think by my calculation, there are 5 terminals in the U.S. that are automated or semi-automated, 2 in L.A., and I think, 2 in Virginia and half of one in New Jersey. And they handle less than 10% of the U.S. container volume today. So I don't think there's any burning desire to do that anyway.
So, Jim, on that topic, so you've led one of the largest ports, in the country, in the world. What do you say about, the competitiveness of the U.S. ports when you think about globally, and put that in the context of what you were just describing as automation and as expensive as it is? What do you say to people when they talk about the competitiveness of the U.S. ports?
Well, there's no question. I mean, in my container shipping time, in our board meetings, the cost of U.S. terminals was always brought up as being extreme, productivity-wise not being what it should be. There were some exceptions to that. As you remember, Savannah and Charleston were always considered globally competitive, productivity-wise.
Right.
But so, yeah, U.S. terminals are more expensive, but U.S. businesses are more expensive. U.S. wages are more expensive. Right. So I'm not sure there's probably more being made out of that than there needs to be. I think the average user of a port, if I take a Walmart or a Target or an Amazon, I don't think they really care if it's automated or not. They just want to see if it works reliably.
Yeah.
And we always felt in my terminal time that we could staff the terminal we paid good wages. I mean, U.S. port wages are higher than Boeing flight line worker wages, so we always felt we could attract a good workforce, and we didn't want to lose. You lose a lot of flexibility on a terminal when you automate.
Well, and that's what a BCO is looking for, right? Productivity and flexibility.
Yep.
And I guess the argument can be made that automation helps with both of those, or it doesn't. In regards to flexibility. So,
Well, what automation does do, I mean, machines work consistently and they work reliably and they work at night. You can groom the stack. One of the things
24/7.
is
Yep.
on U.S. terminal and is when you have an import stack and you have to dig through containers to get the specific container that somebody wants, and that's where this whole peel-off pile discussion, came into being. But that's a bit of a misleading thing as well. But an automated stack can get groomed at night with an algorithm to make that work better the next day. And I think what we should be talking about, and certainly automation can play a role. What the goal of a terminal is to maximize the throughput per acre in the terminal, consistent with a certain service level.
Yep.
So we all agree that getting a truck in and out within an hour is probably the right service level that we would expect. And we want to maximize the throughput for the acreage because this land is scarce. I mean, not finding a lot of 1,000, 1,500 acre new terminal sites in the United States. Jasper County in South Carolina is one potentially for the future, but not many. So we need to be about how do we increase the throughput through a finite land resource. And automation shouldn't be ruled out, just like technology in gates has not been ruled out.
Yep.
Shouldn't be ruled out as an option, but that option should be left to reasonable business people in discussion with their union to negotiate as is called for in the current contract. The wording in the current contract, if anyone reads it, you would say, well, hey, that's pretty significant wording. I mean, that commits to a very detailed, sort of purposeful process to discuss it with no guarantee that you're going to achieve it. If a terminal goes in at the schedule and says we're going to reduce 30% of the workforce, I can assure you it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be one of my questions to you, Jim, is like, is the ILA trying to remove the current language that's in the contract?
Mm-hmm.
That's my understanding. I don't know that. I mean, I'm not in those discussions, but my understanding is that they certainly want to ban automation. That is their goal, is to perpetually ban automation forever and ever and ever in the East Coast and Gulf. And that may be a starting point negotiation-wise, but I don't think any reasonable entity can be expected to agree to that.
Yeah. Why would you do that? Because your point earlier, and actually KP and I talked about it, it's on our episode that released this morning, is like, you have a finite amount of space that we need to get more volume through. Mm-hmm. And how do we do that? And we've got to do it, like you said, logically, with remembering that, safety and efficiency and productivity are key for those members. And to me, that's the approach that I would be looking at, is like, okay, we need to be looking at automation because it is important for safety. It is important for productivity. And it does affect our members. It does affect the consumers of the United States, and their members are consumers in the United States. So I was just curious, like, are they trying to now say, okay, the contract that we had, the language that we had in the past agreement, the current agreement that's expiring, we want to change that. We want to take that completely out.
Redo. Yep.
That would be my understanding, is they want to substantially change it or even eliminate it. And there's no reason to do it. And I think the point that you make, Kevin Higgins, is that this is ultimately about the efficiency of the U.S. global supply chain. It's about
100%.
Large importers and exporters, having a reasonable ability to use, a finite number of terminals. And we shouldn't take anything off the table that makes that a possibility. And certainly, there is a potential that automation over time if properly employed, can improve the efficiency of a terminal. We've seen that in Europe. We see it in Asia. It's a different discussion when wages are $39 an hour than when they're $63 an hour. I mean, certainly as wages go up, the attractiveness of automation increases. And I don't think there's any question about that. But I think the way it's being portrayed is that if there's no ban on automation, every terminal is going to automate.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case.
Yeah.
That's just not the case.
Yeah.
But this, to me, it's a matter of U.S. industrial policy. I mean, we look in every business. You ran warehouses in Walmart. I mean, you've had some cases they were not automated. The trend was to automate more. The import distribution centers are now being automated to increase the throughput. And I don't think anybody in the shipping industry is approaching automation with the idea of reducing the workforce. I think they approach it with the idea of leveraging the workforce and improving the productivity of a terminal. Those are just two different things.
Yeah.
And as a follow up, KP, sorry to jump in there. Do we have any like factual evidence from the terminals that have deployed automation on how that's improved efficiency? Say it's LBCT or TrayPack or one of those terminals. Do we have any of that data, Jim?
Well, that's almost the point counterpoint. So the folks that automate will tell you that it is significantly improved. So what does that mean? So that should manifest itself in costs per unit or some productivity per unit, right? Be it loads on and off ships, be it gate turns, things of that nature. I don't think there's clear evidence that one solution has produced better outcome than the other.
Yeah.
And again, as I said to you, when you have already agreed to semi-automation, so what does that mean? That means that the horizontal transport between the stack in the yard and the ship to and from the ship is manual. So when that is the case, that blunts the benefit. You're not using automated guided vehicles to take containers to and from the ship. So already you have sort of fought that battle with one hand tied behind your back. Right? I mean, because you have conceded something that is significant there. So I don't think it's a clear answer that a terminal has become overnight better because it's automated. I think the right answer is that over time it can grow. You can use the land that you have more efficiently, assimilate growth so you don't have to find a bunch of new greenfield terminals, which, as you know, are not available. No. If you look across the top 10 U.S. container ports in the U.S. and you name them, we're not going to do it here in the interest of time, there are probably 3 or 4 ports that have land that can grow, where they can grow. Do terminals. And they're not L.A., Long Beach, and New York.
Right.
So it's in the South and the Gulf where that can happen. So it's as you know, they're hard to permit. They're expensive. There's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of NIMBY, not in my backyard. We don't want the truck. So we need to leverage existing capacity because it is expensive infrastructure. A new container terminal is over $1 billion in investment today. And we need to do all that we can to make it, to make them as efficient as possible to support the supply chain.
Yeah. So, Jim, we're talking today a couple of days before both parties have agreed to, the holidays are over. They've agreed to finally meet again, January 7th, I believe. So what's that like? I mean, give us a flavor of if you know what that meeting is like. Where do they have it? Does somebody bring donuts and somebody brings coffee? And do they go through PowerPoints and say, here's my position? What is that negotiation like?
I think there's a lot of pre-discussion. I mean, I don't think anybody walks into those meetings not knowing what the other person's position is.
Is it a room full of 50 people? Is it 5 people? What's that like?
I think the productive part of those meetings is in smaller groups than that, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, depends when it's a wage scale meeting, it's typically in Florida. There's 200 or 300 people there, but like most meetings in any business, there's a small group that sort of lays out the parameters of the meeting before the meeting happens. I suspect it'll be very contentious. I mean, because that is kind of the way things have gone.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest about it. I mean, I think an objective observer looking at this industry would say that the ILA has gotten their way more than not. There are reasons for it. The one reason is that U.S. labor cost is part of an ocean carrier's supply chain. Ocean carrier's total cost is not more than 5%.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it increases 20%, say that's 1%, it's de minimis on the total cost structure. I do also think that the ocean carriers have gotten locked into this direct employer relationship. In many cases, they're not a direct employer, but we all know the history. There are no U.S. flag carriers anymore. They were bought by foreign companies. Maersk bought Sealand. CMA bought APL. And I think that changed a little bit when you didn't have a U.S. carrier with a political clout in D.C., So they are easily portrayed as these foreign entities that are making a lot of profit. I mean, hell, they made profit in 1 year. They made profit in 2022, which probably made up for a lot of the losses they'd had the 20 years before. But that sort of has been singled out. And the narrative is these foreign companies are taking wages from U.S. workers. Now, how do you combat a narrative like that, to the mass of people? I mean, that sounds bad, right? I mean, it sounds bad. But I think that those of us that have been in the industry realize that these 10 or 11 major ocean carriers are the reason we've had globalization. We wouldn't have, there's 200 million TEUs a year of loaded container movements that are the reason that we have a global finished goods supply chain, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think the narrative is unfortunate in the sense, but I believe the ILA has, they're smart. They know what they want. They have very unified in their approach, and they have been the winner in these negotiations for a long time. And I'm not sure I see the mechanism for that changing really.
Yeah.
Anytime soon, short of, the ocean carriers saying, look, we're really not employers. We don't need to be in the middle of this anymore. But I don't know how they would do that. Or
Yeah.
Crystal ball, the 7th meeting, you see that being contentious. And again, we're a week out from the expiration. Crystal ball, is there another extension? Is it we stamp off and stomp off on the 7th and say, okay, we're done, and everyone prepares for a full-on strike on the 15th?
Yeah.
And if so, how long does that last? Is it like last time, a couple of days? We've got the election. I mean, we've got the inauguration on the 20th. Where does that play into that?
Well, the timing is very unusual, and I'm sure that's why you portrayed it that way. I mean, you've got a new administration getting inaugurated on the 20th. As you know, President Trump met with leadership of the ILA and really verbalized support for.
Did that surprise you?
No, no. I have never felt that President Trump was against unions, and I don't think anybody should take a position against unions. I mean, I don't believe that's productive. It didn't really surprise me, but I don't think there's as strident support in this administration as there was in the Biden administration. I mean, the Biden administration from the jump made it very clear that being pro-union was their number one objective. It's part of every infrastructure grant that's been given. They completely changed the NLRB to make sure that unions had their way. I don't think this administration is going to be that way.
Yeah.
But I do.
Do you mean with that, Jim? Do you mean, if there is a strike, it's a very, very short one because the administration steps in or is involved to a level that maybe the Biden administration was not willing to do?
Well, I think so. The answer to your question is, I'm guessing there will be a work stoppage on the 15th. I don't think there'll be an extension, because I don't think the carriers and the USMX are going to agree to ban automation. I mean, I just don't see.
You can't.
I certainly
If
hope
that's
they
the goal, then yes, there will be a strike.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I do think with the new administration coming in on the 20th, I think it would get quickly solved some way or another, because number one, a long work stoppage would really gum up the ports.
Yeah.
We know that.
Mhm.
Number two, the workforce doesn't want to be out of work for more than a week. I mean, they don't have a strike fund. It comes at, cost of their own wages. We're just right after the holidays, so
Yeah.
people had expenses at the holidays. So that, I think, maximum 1 week if it is.
Yeah.
That's my guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing just like everyone else is, but I think one would be foolish not to plan for that, at least. If you haven't planned, as we talked last time, if you haven't planned for it by now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
Right.
And
I think the planning
and
questions, yeah, everyone, if they haven't planned, I think that's unfortunate. But I think most everybody that can plan have planned. It's what they've planned for and for how long, I think is probably, the bigger question. But once a resolution, let's say they go back, well, what are they going back to? Is it a slowdown? Is it really dependent upon what the result is? Or do you think everybody can make nice, and everybody goes back to full productivity, and the month of February, post Chinese New Year, we ramp up with volume again?
no, I again, I don't see tactics such as slowdowns
Okay.
happening. The ILA leadership is intelligent. They know full well that freight can move. If some freight is discretionary, it can move back to the West Coast. And you've
Yeah.
seen that happen now. In fact, the last 4 or 5 months have shown the West Coast growing at the expense of the East Coast and Gulf.
Yep.
And they're smart business people. Their goal is to increase their man hours, to increase their workforce. Bear in mind, I believe it's safe to say every ILA local that I know of on the East Coast and Gulf in a major container port is adding workforce. I mean, the man hours have grown dramatically. I looked on the USMX annual report of 2023. I think they've grown from, in 15 years to, 15 years time, from like 31 million man hours to 47 million man hours.
Wow.
I mean, there's been a tremendous growth in the workforce. And a lot of this is an aging workforce. So every local is hiring in some fashion. So the ILA's main objective is to take business from the West Coast. That's pretty clear. And the demographics and sort of the fundamentals in our business are such that that's a natural process that you and we've all watched happen since 2002, since the first work stoppage on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see this will get settled. I don't see any collateral effects, in terms of, do terminals go back to working properly? They certainly will. Everybody's got pride in their work. I mean, look, this might be an adversarial discussion, but don't think at the end of the day that the workforce in a given port isn't proud of the product that they provide. They are, and they're conscientious people, whether union or management or whatever. They want to do must want to do a very good job, I would say.
Yeah.
So I don't see a cloud. To answer your question, I don't see a lingering impact beyond the fact that, if I'm a foreign ocean carrier, I'm saying, well, gee, how do I get out of this narrative that I'm in, that I'm sort of ripping off the American worker when I'm going to be paying them $63 an hour at the end of 6 years? I mean, that most people don't see that as a ripoff. I talked to a longshoreman the other day, and they called me and wished me a happy new year. A friend of mine, and I asked him how many hours he had worked last year. And you won't guess, so you'll know that 2,080 hours is a 40-hour week.
Mm-hmm.
This gentleman had worked 3,700 hours.
Wow.
3,700 hours. So these folks are all working. They're making a good income. They're having a great impact on their local economies
Yep.
in terms of their ability to consume. So the good news is I don't see a long-term impact here.
I think back to something that you said earlier, we kind of touched on, Jim and KP, is that, I know a lot of people, we have conversations around what's going on with the ILA and with the ports and stuff like that. And I'm constantly reminding them that these ocean carriers are the customers
Right.
of the terminal operators that employ the labor.
So you're right. I mean, it's a mess. I mean, if you look at the membership of the USMX, and I looked at it preparing for another discussion on this topic, I think there are 18 ocean carriers, all of which are foreign entities, because I think Crowley is not part of it. There are 10 local port steamship associations, which sort of aggregate all the local employers. There's probably 200 companies in those. And then there's like 12 terminal operators. And 2 of those terminal operators happen to be owned by foreign shipping lines. One is APM Terminals, and one is the global terminal footprint that CMA bought in New Jersey and New York. So this is a very diverse entity.
Yeah.
And they are the terminal operators are U.S. entities. I mean,
Right.
they maybe have foreign ownership. Some are owned by private equity. Macquarie owns, Blackstone owns. I mean, it's very diverse. But they've gotten painted into this narrative through their own negligence. To be honest with you, I think I'm blunt. I mean, they've walked themselves into this. They've walked themselves into this mess, and they got to find a way to walk themselves out of it somehow if they can.
So Jim, with that, I was introduced to essentially, ILWU 2002. You mentioned that before. It's Higgins' fault that I started my career
welcome to Global
at
Logistics.
that time. But if someone had told me at that time that I would be doing a podcast, 20 plus years later, talking about almost the same thing. Now, it wasn't really automation that I recall, but my point is we're dealing with, labor disruptions, and it has massive cascading effects across the supply chain. Do you think we'll ever get out of this cycle? Will it always be a West Coast or East Coast every 6 years or 4 years or whatever the agreement is? Is anything going to ever get us out of this type of cycle?
Well, the fact that Kevin Higgins moved to LA Long Beach in 2002 showed you how much she loved you.
I guess
100%. I trusted you.
I definitely learned a lot.
But no, I would say, so first of all, we haven't had a work stoppage on the East Coast since the 1970s.
Yeah.
But a threat, just a threat of one.
Right. So I'm coming to that. I mean, So the West Coast been a lot more contentious. But I think as long as you have this multi-employer bargaining model where you have these entities negotiating on behalf of stakeholders with the union, it's an imbalanced relationship. And I think in a 6-year contract, when those come up, you're going to have contentious discussions as you had in the automotive industry, as you had in other industries. So I don't know that that's going to change. I mean, I don't see that changing. But
I want the audience to listen to that, digest that. If you're in leadership roles, you're managing, an import program, that needs to be part of your, planning and strategy. If it isn't, even, and I'm sure that it is to a certain degree, but you're going to be like me 20 years later, you're still going to be dealing with it.
But I think the thing is, the big danger here is, and this, the impact on the C-suite. So the C-suite and senior supply chain leadership is saying, okay, we've done this global sourcing. What is the mid-90s when we started outsourcing? Now we've done all this stuff, and now we're fighting with China. We're going to have tariffs with China, and now we're moving everything to Vietnam, and then Indonesia, maybe it's India. We're going to bring it back to Mexico, or what are we going to do? So everything that interjects risk into a component of an operation is going to get called into question.
Yep.
So, they also, you can win the battle and lose the war here. So you got to be careful. I mean, this has been a historic growth industry where I think the American consumer has benefited from offshoring. It may not be possible, may not be politically palatable to say, but the success, the consumption success of our country is based on having reasonable cost products, and we can't make them all here.
Yep.
Yes.
And Mexico's got its limits. We know that everybody's going to move stuff to Mexico for the last 20 years. It's happened some, it's happening some, but it's not going to replace China. You know that. It cannot, because they have their own limitations infrastructure-wise. And most of the developed world's got a workforce challenge, right? I mean, we are losing workforce. Those of us with gray hair are moving out of the workforce, right? So I think the one needs to be careful in this getting too much out of hand, because the impact on the C-suite, which is managing risk on a day-to-day basis, can be significant. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're headed to. You're saying, because supply chain management at the end of the day is about risk management, right?
Yep.
I mean, it is.
Absolutely.
You're not rewarded for doing anything. You're only penalized for doing a bad job in the supply chain. If your shelves are empty, then the inventory merchants are not very happy people. They expect the shelves to be full. They expect you to get the product there on time. And I think that's the danger here ultimately, is that people pull back in the midst of all these other discussions about tariffs and things like that. And they say, what, this global supply chain is a lot riskier than we bargained for, and we have to look at doing something different. But it's clearly not the idea of making toys in Topeka, Kansas. I mean, that's just not that's not going to happen.
Yeah. But your point is, I think, should be well taken, because like if you have a significant shift in sourcing, or if you go near sourcing, or if you bring it in domestically, then that's volume that's not going through these ports.
Right. And think about this. So all these big container ships that we talk about, I mean, there's 5,000 container ships in the world, but all the new builds are 13,000 TEU and above.
Yep.
Those ships were built on trade with Asia.
Yep.
Those ships are much more constrained going into different ports. So you've got an industry, a supporting industry, again, this 200 million loaded TEUs a year of these foreign ocean carriers that have committed to build big ships to drive supply chain economics, So when all of a sudden that changes, they've got a big problem, right? They've just ordered, I mean, you've seen the statistics. I think I saw a stat that the global container ship fleet increased by 11% last year. And the only reason that didn't create overcapacity was the ships had to go via the Cape instead of through the Suez Canal. So that essentially sucked up the overcapacity in the industry. Otherwise, we would have had another rate war, probably. So it's a delicate balance. And but no, I think they'll always with this sort of construction of sort of professional negotiators in a multi-employer basis negotiating with the union, I think there'll always be some contention at the time of contract renegotiation.
Yeah.
So we've mentioned
I'll easily say to you, contingency planning is overrated, because you've seen in the past, how many times did you contingency plan only to see an extension, and then you had to contingency plan again and again and again and again. At the end of the day, there are not long work stoppages in this industry. I don't see that happening at all.
Well, we've mentioned a couple of times, tariffs and sourcing, ILA. So we've got a new administration coming in just a couple of weeks. So Jim, I'd love to get, with that new administration coming in, based on your background and experience, what recommendations would you make to this administration in shaping maritime policy?
Good question.
Well, I would say that starts with the topic of trade. And I'm a free trader, but I'm a fair trader.
Mm.
So my hope, I think this administration has a lot of challenges. We have a $36 trillion deficit that's projected to grow to $54 trillion, three quarters of which is entitlements, which everybody says they're not going to touch. I hope on the topic of trade that the discussion of tariffs is with a view toward making trade fair. Meaning we have access, because what we need to do as a country is be exporting more. The only way we're going to get out of our potential deficit issues, not potential, our current and future larger deficit issues, is economic growth. The new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, actually is from Charleston, very highly regarded in financial circles. And he's basically said, we've got to grow 3% or more to get out of the situation that we're in. And we can grow, but one component of growing has to be growing exports.
Tariffs will start a trade war that will not help do that.
Tariffs will not help. Tariffs create inflation. They are should be a jawboning tool at the most. I hope so. I think in the first Trump administration, there was a philosophical distrust toward China. I'm not saying that was misplaced. I'm not saying there are best friends in the world or not, but they are the number 2 economy in the world. And they are, more importantly, a 1.4 trillion billion population country that's growing the middle class. So them in India are the markets of the future.
Yep.
With growing middle class. India more so because they have a younger population that will want to consume more. So we need to get about the business of increasing exports. And American companies are very well positioned to do that. But we got to have fair access to markets.
Yeah.
But it takes people. It takes people that understand trade to do part of that. And my real hope is, what I'm seeing up to now, the people that have been appointed, I think, in these sort of economic roles are experienced enough that they'll be able to manage through it. If it becomes just we're going to put a 6% tariff on everything, then I don't know what to tell you.
Maybe you should be a part of that appointment, Jim.
No. I don't think so. I don't think anybody needs a reforming container shipping executive to do that.
So with that, Jim, what do you see in the next decade? Challenges, trends in the maritime industry for the next 10 years.
So I think that the industry has reached a structure where you have 10 or 11 major global carriers. Now they've reformed the alliances this year. You've got the new Gemini Alliance, which is a very different alliance.
Yep.
A lot less direct calls, a lot more feedering. That doesn't apply in the U.S., by the way, with the Jones Act. You know that. I mean, the Jones Act restricts the ability to do that. But I think it's an industry structure that it for the consumer, it can't be better. I know people wrench their hands. Everybody wants to, gets concerned about concentration in the ocean carrier industry. I mean, having 10 or 11 lines operating in 4 alliances, that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
If you want to change it, it didn't change into more fragmentation. It's only going to be less fragmented.
Mm.
It's only going to be more concentrated. Mm. So I think it's a good structure. It's an industry that is committed to new capacity. You can see that now. I think the emphasis on the 24,000 TEU ships is going to go away. I think what you're seeing is sort of hitting on the 13 to 16,000 TEU ship as being the right size. I think most people think the 24,000s are probably too big, except for Europe and Asia. So I think that they are committed to invest. I think the big question is the fuel of the future. They haven't answered that question. I think a lot of these alternative fuel discussions have gotten way out of hand. The whole EV discussion in this country has gotten way out of hand. We aren't ready to handle it even. But so that that question has certainly got to be answered. What is the fuel of the future? But I think the industry is prepared to support the growth of the world supply chain. I think it will continue to grow. I don't see an alternative to becoming totally protectionist. That doesn't make any sense to me. But I do think there are ways the industry can be much more efficient. And one of those is visibility. I think if I look at our industry,
Love it.
and I recall being, having a customer service organization in Hapag Lloyd or in a port, 90% of the questions we got over the phone were questions you never give UPS or FedEx. That would be fed to you electronically.
Right.
And I think the efficiency of the global supply chain in the U.S. particularly, could be enhanced by really good visibility solutions. And there are some good visibility solutions. I'm an advisor for a company, Gnosis Freight in Charleston, that has a really good visibility. What is visibility? Where's my container during the voyage from origin to destination? That shouldn't be a hard question.
A topic near and dear to Higgins' heart. Yep,
absolutely.
But it hasn't been. And even when the carriers were in trade lanes, they were supposedly going to deliver something, then they abandoned it.
Yeah.
So, and I believe one of the reasons people get so panicked about the supply chain is this lack of visibility. If once you know where your cargo is, it becomes a lot easier to manage, right?
Yep.
You can answer the questions. I've been on these FMC task forces. You have too. And what you're amazed is you've got Fortune 500 companies with management trainees building spreadsheets that are essentially out of date the minute the spreadsheet's created because the market for them move somewhere else. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So if we can solve that, I think that is maybe the biggest thing that we could do to enhance the perception of there's a perception that the global supply chain is somehow unreliable. Right?
Yep.
I mean, I think
there is.
And I think we can certainly correct that. But I'm optimistic. I don't believe that we can change I'm a David Ricardo theory of comparative advantage person. I think trade is good. I think it enables us to be productive with the workforce that we have to build higher value products. And yet, for every time the production cost of a product goes up, that might benefit the company who's producing it, but the consumer, it doesn't benefit, right? So there's a cause and effect in everything that we do, and we have to balance that somehow. I think we've achieved a pretty good balance that we'd be sad if we go away from it.
Yeah.
But I'm often wrong, and I'm never in doubt. So.
That's great. Well, listen, Jim, this has been great. I think we could go on and probably have a couple of more podcast episodes, and we definitely will do that. It sounds like, this topic is going to be pretty fresh for the next couple of weeks and months or whatever. We'd love to have you back. I think I said this last time, when it's all resolved, whenever that may be. But this has been really, really good. Higgins?
Yeah. I want to talk, next time we have Jim on, I want to talk about big ships, because I have my own opinion on big ships. I miss the days of the 4,400 and the 6,500 TEU ships.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's a episode. I think we hit on a lot of topics that will be already planned or potential planned episodes.
Yeah.
We'd
love to have Jim back on those as well.
We're never going back to those days, unfortunately.
No, those are feeder ships now.
The fuel of the future question is a big one. I mean,
it is.
Is it, bioethanol? What is it? And I think you have to understand that this whole fleet expansion has happened in spite of that being unknown.
Yeah.
And that the International Maritime Organization has their work cut out to define that. And that's going to, and the fuel costs are different, right? So don't wish for it. You might get it, right? I mean, if you want, a fuel of the future, that's the last thing I'll leave your listeners. It's going to cost more.
Yeah.
It's not IFO 380 fuel at that point. It could be double the cost.
Yep.
And fuel cost is a significant part of container shipping. So So
future episode, definitely.
Excellent
on the
topic.
list.
Yeah.
So that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thanks, Jim, for again, as always, really, really insightful. Let's see what happens and transpires in the coming days and weeks, and we'll look forward to visiting with you again. So with
thanks
that,
for having
everyone,
me on, and I wish you a good 2025, and hopefully none of us end up in the transfer portal. So.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. If today's discussion inspired you, don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast.
Remember, every great journey in logistics starts with a single step forward. Let's continue working together to transform the industry.